184.
Yeah, recommend they support.
All set?
Wait till she.
Senate will please come to order. We'll have a brief moment of silence to gather our thoughts as we go from blizzard to sun to whatever else is going to happen in today's weather outside. Thank you. Are there any announcements? Seeing none, we have one bill for referral under Rule 31. We have S-167. The S-167 affects the revenues of the state and therefore will be referred to the Committee on Finance. We have two House bills for reference. The first being H-856, which passed the House on March 15th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-856, an act relating to medical leave for a serious injury.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We then also have received H-870, which passed the House on March 15th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-870, an act relating to professions and occupations regulated by the Office of Professional Regulation.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to the Committee on Government Operations. That brings us to the orders of the day. Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm wondering if we might ask the doorman to round up senators in the cloakroom and other places.
Thank you, Senator.
Draw my request.
Thank you. I had seen some folks circulating and I thought we could get through that start without quite everybody here. And I know there's a number of senators that will be joining us very shortly. S-150 is up for action. S-150 was referred to the Committee on Judiciary, which considered the same and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-150, an act relating to automobile insurance.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Judiciary, the senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. S-150 deals with automobile insurance and how our insurance companies deal with certain things. And I think it's fair to say most members of the Senate Judiciary Committee were surprised to find out that the coverage that they thought they had wasn't what they really had. And if I might just say, we narrowed the bill as it came in, as it was introduced. It suggested raising the limits for the uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. We chose not to do that because of the testimony that it would increase our rates. But anytime we make any changes to auto insurance, there's always that threat that it will raise rates. And I kind of wondered why, when it cost $7 million for a Super Bowl ad, and so many of them were from the auto insurance industry. Must be a very competitive market, Mr. President. And I would suggest that any cost of S-150 would be covered by one Super Bowl ad. S-150 is a bill relating to the aftermath of a motor vehicle crash. In two narrow ways, it adjusts the law so that innocently injured victims can get more value out of their own auto insurance policies. Our work on the bill started with a testimony from a Vermonter that was horrifically injured by a drunk driver. And I can't tell you how much sympathy your Committee on Judiciary had to hear from Con Densmore from over in Orange County. Con told us how he was riding his motorcycle alongside with his friend Kenny when his life was turned upside down. In Con's own words, as I approached the intersection with Chase Hollow Road, I saw a truck coming at me from the opposite direction. I remember thinking, turn, turn, turn. but he didn't. I remember my body hitting the truck and seeing dirt sky as I was thrown. I remember lying in the grass and Kenny, my buddy, coming to my side. I knew I was badly hurt and can remember hearing my wife Jackie's voice in the ambulance. I don't know if I was going to survive. He did survive, but he lost limbs and his life is now lived with debilitating pain. He can't work and he struggles to support his family. What we also learned, sadly, from this story, Mr. President, was because of the way our current law works, the $100,000 he collected from the drunk driver's auto liability insurance was deducted from the amount Con was able to get from his own underinsured motorist insurance. Con had been paying for $200,000 of underinsured motorist coverage to protect himself, but he was only able to collect half that amount. So instead of collecting $300,000 to help deal with his catastrophic costs, he only got 2/3 of that. Frankly, the committee was surprised to learn about the provisions in the law, and frankly, Mr. President, and I happened to have my own auto insurance policy with me, and I was surprised to find out what I had too. While I have a little bit more insurance than Con, I would have been similarly impacted were I to have one of these tragic accidents. In our view, it's just not fair. Injured people should be able to get the full value of their own insurance policies. So Section 1 of the bill clarifies the definition of uninsured motorists and then prohibits the deduction of payments from the at-fault driver from a victim's own policy. So in the case of that's in the outline here that I sent around, Mr. President, you would have, rather than a $50,000 recovery, under this proposed law, you would have a $75,000 recovery. Now, no amount of coverage could cover all of Con's medical bills. They're in the 4 millions. So even the auto insurance is only a small part of it. Section 2 of the bill relates to another area that many of you may be surprised about. You may have, because you may have large deductibles, have something called med pay. So that covers anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 of coverage, and it covers the cash that you might have to pay as a deductible in your auto insurance policy. So one would assume when you collect from the auto insurance company, and your health care, you have this deductible and you paid for it, and called MedPay, and provides no fault coverage for medical expenses you face right after being injured in a motor vehicle crash. We learned that right now your insurance company is allowed to claw back that payment from you later on when your claim against the at-fault driver is settled. So in essence, people are paying for an insurance benefit that their own insurance company will later make them pay back. Section 2 prohibits the subrogation of MedPay coverage, which is the legal term for a law that allows your own insurance company to put a lien on your eventual settlement. The provision is similar to a law in New Hampshire where MedPay subrogation is prohibited. Section 3 of the bill is the effective date as January 1, 2025, and will only apply to policies that are newly written after that date, so it doesn't impact existing policies. Vermont currently has the lowest overall average auto insurance premium in the country at $1,353. The uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage components of a typical insurance policy are relatively small. By far, the largest part of your insurance bill is liability and collision coverage. The massive increases in healthcare costs and general wage inflation mean people that can only afford the lower levels of insurance are being left further behind. The idea of being made whole after an accident, after paying healthcare bills caused by the accident, with not a lot left to live on. Last year, some of the main name brand auto insurance companies you're familiar with, from all the advertising you on TV, are reporting higher earnings than ever And we took testimony from impacted citizens, representatives of the Vermont Association of Justice, and representatives of the auto insurance industry. And the vote in your Senate Judiciary Committee was 5-0-0. We urge the body to concur. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance did look at this bill. I didn't realize till last week that Finance didn't regulate automobile insurance. So I'm going to happily send all the aftermarket parts complaints to Judiciary and all the local mechanics that want to be fully paid by the insurance company over there. I'm not too unhappy to be rid of it, but we did look at this bill. It will have some impact on rates. Right now, when you buy $50,000 worth of uninsured or underinsured driver insurance, it is calculated on the fact that you will get some payment or might get some payment from the underinsured driver or uninsured. This will guarantee you the full amount, but because that isn't how it's calculated now, it will have some impact on the cost of insurance. But the Finance Committee chose to take no action.
Question is Senator from Rutland.
Mr. President, may I interrogate the presenter of the bill?
Senator from Bennington is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm assuming that this is only going to increase or going to affect ratepayers in Vermont. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. They're only, but it is in Rhode Island currently has passed similar laws, and other states are looking at similar laws. But this bill only affects insurance in Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm also led to assume that this doesn't affect, it's not going to affect anybody from Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, or Quebec. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Did you take any testimony or did you look at property damage?
No, Mr. President, we were focused on health insurance and the coverage for the injuries as a result of accidents, not on property damage.
I thank the senator from Bennington County.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Judiciary? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've adopted the report of the Committee on Judiciary. Question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, you've ordered third reading of S-150. We now have up for consideration S-183. S-183 was read for the first time and is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. The committee considered the same and recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-183, an act relating to planning for the Agency of Healthcare Administration.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Government Operations, the senator from Windsor.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. If people would like to follow along, our strike all amendment is on page 1019 of today's calendar. The Agency of Human Services is the largest agency in Vermont state government. It's comprised of 6 departments: the Department of Children and Families, the Department of Aging and Independent Living, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health, and the Department of Vermont Health Access. Each of these departments administer programs and services, manage relationships with community partners and providers, and strategically develop policies and practices to improve outcomes for Vermonters in compliance with federal and state law. AHS serves so many Vermonters through its public health division and our particularly vulnerable populations through our child support, Reach Up, 3 Squares, food assistance, corrections, and home heating support, just to name a few. It was created in 1970 during Governor Dean Davis's administration. With the growth of healthcare and our social service needs, this agency has expanded exponentially. It is now the largest agency in state government. It has a budget of over $1.3 billion, and that's just general fund, and employs 3,829 people as of the 1st of January. Over a third of our state employees. For several biennium, a former secretary of the Agency of Human Services, our own senator from Caledonia, has proposed that we consider breaking up this behemoth of an agency. S-183 came to us as introduced with the presumption that the agency should be divided into two separate agencies. Your Senate Government Operations Committee thought that the question of whether the agency had the right structure to best serve Vermonters was in fact a good one. However, after taking testimony and talking to appropriate stakeholders about what changes to its structure would best improve AHS's ability to fulfill its mission, we chose to begin this substantial task, and it is, don't underestimate the scale of this task, by asking the agency itself, in consultation with its key partners, to come back to us next February 1st with recommendations on how to re-envision the existing AHS. This strike all amendment asks that the Secretary shall consider options for re-envisioning the Agency of Human Services, such as restructuring the existing agency or dividing the existing Agency of Human Services into two or more separate agencies. And that the Secretary of the agency and the other stakeholders identified in the subsections shall evaluate the current structure of the Agency of Human Services, identify potential options for re-envisioning the agency, and engage in a cost-benefit analysis of each option, and develop one or more recommendations for implementation. We look forward to their recommendations. We heard from the director of the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocates, our own legislative counsel, the chief healthcare advocate from Vermont Legal Aid, our senator from Caledonia, the state long-term care ombudsperson from Vermont Legal Aid, and the director of policy for the Agency of Human Services. Your SGO committee vote was 6-0-0, and we ask for your support on S-183. Thank you.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I may be one person who actually has a historical perspective on this area of state government, because I predate the creation of the Agency of Human Services, which, as was noted, was created in the administration of Governor Davis. And in that time, our healthcare role in state government has expanded beyond anything that we would have envisioned back in 1970. Basically, at that point, our healthcare program was to provide healthcare coverage to families and children and beneficiaries of aged, blind, and disabled benefits, as well as people who are in nursing homes. It was very small. We used to laugh that, in fact, the Medicaid director could operate the program out of his bottom drawer of his desk. And you only have to look at what is healthcare today, what we have of the amount of money, our initiatives to look at how we deliver healthcare, how to improve outcomes, how to help systems become accountable. I've heard over the years that this is just moving chairs around the deck of the ship. I would submit that when you ask one administrator, as composed of the 6 secretaries that exist for the other parts of state government, with the diversity, the complexity, and the money that is associated with this one operational entity, is a challenge. It is not any way casting a negative commentary on whoever's heading up the agency. But if I were to say to the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield, why don't you run correctional facilities? Why don't you determine benefits for public assistance? Why don't you pursue child support? Why don't you protect children? Why don't you recruit foster parents? And why don't you deal with the homelessness? I would suggest that you would say that that is in fact a very diverse, and there are only so much time in the course of a day to really give the administrative attention. So from my perspective, it's how to create an organizational structure that in fact is, can be accountable and can be managed. And right now what we have is, oh my gosh, that agency is costing us so much money. And of course it is, it's half of state government. On the other hand, the diversity is a challenge. And I know that people would say, but this is connected to this or this or this. And I will admit, everything is. John Muir said it best, everything is connected to everything else. And so how well our social service programs work, how well our educational system works, how our housing system works, how our job system works, all influence the programs and the delivery and actually help status. So I realize that people want to look at this in a very deliberative way. I understand that, and it will at least be a step forward. This body has passed unanimously a bill in the past to do this. So I look forward to having this move forward. I think it's always good to have it organized where there might be a potential change of administration, because naturally all those forces come in to preserve what I have and the way it is now. But working harder in a flawed system doesn't get you to where you need to be. So my reason for speaking today is to share my perspective. I spent 35 years in that system, and I understand how complex it is. I also understand the work ahead if we are really to carry out the goals that we have put forward in legislation that we have passed, and how we really are to serve Vermonters well, and how we can hold and create an organization that you can hold an administrator really accountable for the outcomes. So I see this as absolutely an important step. It's to get something of scope and management. And I will also say that we're the only state that has corrections as part of that Agency of Human Services. I think that makes a whole lot of sense, because we have a lot of women who are incarcerated, they have children, they are oftentimes in foster care. We have parents that are coming back, the fathers are incarcerated. We also want to support people in the communities. And we also know that our goal is to help people who have been incarcerated make that transition back to the community and never have to go back into the correctional system. So I see that as very much human capital. I see it very much connected to families and children. And so I would say that I think that there are configurations of functions, programs that make sense, and they are complementary. They have to work in a complementary way. We have to, as I've said, we have this whole thing about siloed funding, and it's true. As long as money is limited, we have categories and we have silos, but that doesn't mean we have to be siloed in our thinking. And to me, that's part of what we have to overcome. And that is, what do I do here? And how does it support what is done somewhere else? And how do I make sure that I'm getting the best return for the investment? And how do we work with the larger community? It's a huge, huge agenda. And it really needs a lot of attention. It needs a lot of administrative time. And we need to have a system that is of a scope and functional alignment that is realistic for one person to be held accountable. So I support this legislation, and I hope this body will as well. Thank you.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Government Operations, Senator from Chittenden Southeast?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd just say that your Committee on Health and Welfare did look at the proposal amendment this morning and found it as appropriate. I really think that the senator from Caledonia has expressed it extremely well, and we look forward to the report that will come back to us And for me, it's like having too many kids growing up in the house, and then some of them have to leave. They stay connected. They call home once in a while. And, but this is that opportunity for us to move forward with a new vision for our health and welfare programs in the states. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have adopted the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of S 183. We now have up for consideration S 55. S 55 is an act relating to authorizing public bodies to meet electronically under Vermont's open meeting law. Third reading has been ordered. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
S 55, an act relating to authorizing public bodies to meet electronically under Vermont's open meeting law.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed S 55. We now have up for consideration S 186. S 186 is an act relating to the systemic evaluation of recovery residences and recovery communities. Third reading has been ordered. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
S 186, an act relating to the systemic evaluation of recovery residences and recovery communities.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed S 186. We now have up for consideration S 284. S 284 was read for the first time. Third reading was ordered. It is an act relating to the use of electronic devices and digital and online products in schools. I do see that we have an amendment in the calendar. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as many of you know, in the off session, I'm a high school science and math teacher. And so I have enforced a variety of iterations of cell phone policies over the years. I have taken away many cell phones from many children. And so some of these policies have been more painful than other versions. Some of them have been more effectively enforceable, and some of them have had better compliance from the student body just from the outset. So that was my lens coming to this bill. And so it was interesting to me to read about the data that was being collected about the number of schools that did and did not have cell phone policies. But that was not what was most interesting to me. What would be most interesting to me was whether those schools that did have policies found those policies to be effective, or how effective were they. And because this bill examines not just the number of schools, but how the number of schools that have policies or don't have policies, it also went into how those policies were different from a potential model policy. Thought there might be an opportunity to collect a little bit more data. And so that is what initiated this amendment for me. And I did check in with the chair of education, and I think I'm supposed to let the chair talk about how that was received, I assume. But just so you know what is in the amendment, it is on page 1021 of the calendar. And so it doesn't, even though it is replacing section 1B1, it is really additive language. So the first part of 1 is exactly as it appears in the original bill, but then it picks up with and qualitative information regarding the effectiveness of those policies, including information regarding student compliance and whether such policies are being enforced, and the effort required on the part of educators to enforce or to ensure compliance, and then information regarding parent, student, educator satisfaction with those policies. And then based on the conversation that we had on the floor yesterday, that resulted in the second instance of amendment, which has a more additional language for the report that in the consultation with the Department of Health, recommendations for further legislation around cell phones, and then age-appropriate educational opportunities regarding media literacy and the safe and appropriate use of cell phones. So that is the amendment that I brought to the Education Committee. Thank you.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee enjoyed its conversation with Senator Watson, also appreciated some of the concerns expressed around media literacy from Senators Hardy, Bahowski, and Chittenden, and we worked together to form this amendment, and the committee supports it on a vote of 5-0-0 and hopes the Senate will concur.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire the reporter of the amendment?
The senator from Washington is interrogated as the proposer of the amendment.
Thank you. I'm looking at 3 in consultation with the Vermont Department of Health. And it just struck me that so much of the testimony was really the impact on student mental health and how detrimental that these devices have been. I'm just wondering if we, in fact, should recognize a role for our Department of Mental Health along with the Department of Health. I realize they may be prevention, but where we're really talking about the impact on student mental health and what that has been. And we've talked about the suicide connection and placing kids at risk. It does seem like we should articulate a role for that department as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would certainly be amenable to that. Don't know how to navigate that process, but open to that suggestion.
So, Mr. President, could I just a motion to amend the amendment? We take a break.
Thank you. We're getting there. Yes. So probably the ideal thing would be to take a brief recess. We do need amendments in writing,
Okay.
and therefore that could get quickly drafted, and we could. It is within the rules, of course, to offer an amendment to an amendment. So we'll take a brief recess till the fall of the gavel.
Oh, right.
I really don't want to give it.
Senator, please come to order.
Yeah.
Currently, the senator from Caledonia and the senator from Washington have the floor under the senator from Caledonia's floor control. I don't know. But so Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. What is being passed out is an amendment to the amendment that has been offered by Senator from Washington District. And it would simply add not a Department of Health, add the Department of Mental Health. As I said, I feel that based on the testimony that certainly the impact on our students' mental health as a result of some social media and these devices has really been a source of great concern. So this is simply adding the Department of Mental Health to be in consultation with. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to, before I recognize the senator from Chittenden Central, I just want to put a slight Scrivener's adjustment that needs to be added to the amendment that was handed out. On that piece of paper where it says the Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health, the word "and" needs to be included. So if you would all take note of that, that will be ultimately what you're voting on. Do I still need to recognize the senator from Chittenden Central?
Mr. President, I'm trying to imagine the whole sentence. Could you read the proposed new sentence? Because as stated on the sheet, it seems there's a possibility of two instances of "the" that would be duplicative. So just wondering what it would look like altogether.
Senator, you are correct. So
Thank
we will also, from a Scrivener's perspective, strike at the beginning of the inserting the following, we'll strike the word "the." So in quotations on your amendment, it should still read "in consultation with the." And below that, it should read "Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health and." Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just wondering for consistency, we are referring to the Vermont Department of Health, but the other part is the commissioner. So should we, for consistency, I guess this is a question I need to raise in how this was written, whether it should be in consultation with the Vermont Department of Health and the Vermont Department of Mental Health, as opposed to one's the department and one is the department head.
What I'd like to actually ask you, because ultimately it's your amendment. So if you would prefer us to alter it one way or the other, that would be your prerogative.
Thank you, Mr. President. Then I would say for, I don't think this is necessary, falls in parallel construction, but what I would suggest in consultation with the Vermont Department of Health and the Vermont Department of Mental Health, and not use the term commissioner.
Okay, so if I have this correct or correctly interpreted, I'm going to read out what I think it is, and we're just going to do this by process on the floor here. So it'll read "in consultation with the Department of Mental Health and the Vermont Department of Health." Correct. I read it backwards.
Mr.
Just to
President,
confuse things
I'm not
further.
even sure that we need to have Vermont there. That's also perhaps confusing. And so we're simply in consultation with the Department of Health and the Department of Mental Health.
So in consultation with the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Health.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, I'm quite certain the secretary has that. And we're striking the word Vermont. in consultation with the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Health. Anybody else want to add any more to that? So that is the amendment being offered. Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Committee on Education had the opportunity to discuss this and certainly finds it favorable of a vote of 5-0-0.
So the question is, shall the amendment as offered by the senator from Washington be amended as offered by the senator from Caledonia? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the amendment as offered by the senator from Washington with the amendment offered by the senator from Caledonia. Question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Washington as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the senator from Washington as amended. Are there any further amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
S-284, an act relating to the use of electronic devices and digital and online products in schools.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question, Senator from Washington?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to thank the Education Committee for taking this bill up. I was a sponsor of the bill. The original bill, I do still support making an effort to make our schools phone-free, but I appreciate the work that was done by the committee, and I understand why they reached this point that they did with their report. I supported the amendment. I think that added a benefit to the bill. But I think in 389, which we have passed unanimously yesterday, we said that these devices, the social media apps on them are causing harm, and we want them, those that are designing them, to change them. That's going to take years, hopefully not too many years, but I think the process is going to take a long time. But by not acting on trying to do phone-free schools, we are going to continue to have those products in the hands of our youth, which we know from the data is causing immense harm to those children. So I hope that this is just the first step in a process to protecting our children more from these devices. We do this with other things. You know, this body passed a ban on flavored tobacco because we knew it was dangerous to our children, and we knew that the big tobacco was not easy. The amount of money and the effort that they make to advertise to our children and to addict them with the products is difficult for our middle school and high school teachers to counteract. And I think that's the same with the social media. I think we should do this, the media literacy. That's an important part, but I don't think that's going to be enough. The social media, as we know from the other bill that we're going to hopefully pass again today, is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to addict our children to these devices and to their apps and use their data and target them. So I just want to say that I hope this is the first step in a process that we can do more to protect our children for these devices and these applications. Thank you.
Question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed S-284. We now have up for consideration S-289, which is an act relating to age-appropriate design code. Are there any amendments prior to third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
S-289, an act relating to age-appropriate design code.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed S-289. We now have up for consideration S-305. S-305 was a committee bill that is up for second reading. It was considered, it was introduced, I believe, by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, which also will be offering an amendment after listening to after the report of the bill and hearing the amendment. Anyway, please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-305, an act relating to miscellaneous changes related to the Public Utility Commission.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Natural Resources. Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'm reporting S305, which appears in today's calendar, beginning on page 1022. So this bill, an act relating to miscellaneous changes related to the Public Utility Commission, includes a number of fixes. I'd say they're of three types. First is to the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act. The second are pure technical corrections like cross references that are inaccurate and needed to be fixed. And the third is a revision of dates related to the Affordable Heat Act, which is currently under development across the street at the PUC and a cooperation with the Department of Public Service and others. So on page 1022, the first section, Energy Efficiency Modernization Act, senators may remember that in 2020, we passed the first version of this, a pilot, a 3-year pilot that allows our electrical energy efficiency utilities to use up to $2 million of the funds they receive from their electrical energy efficiency charge money to run pilots that are outside their normal focus. So normally our our energy efficiency utilities focus on kilowatt hour reductions. But we're in the midst of a climate crisis that's driven by greenhouse gas emissions. And they come from two sectors for which we have very little programming, our thermal sector and transportation. So we asked these experts in managing programs that help achieve climate-friendly goals to look into how they might help us learn more about how to implement effective programs, cost-effective programs in the area of heating and in the area of transportation. They did that under the first pilot, 2020 through 2023, and then we re-upped it last year. Although the language last year was very close to the original language, when it was evaluated by the department and the PUC, instead of awarding the full funds to up to $2 million for the full 3-year period, there was a proposal perhaps to reduce those funds, and the go-ahead for programming was only given for 1 year. If you're running a pilot and trying to bring people into a new program, it's very hard to start a program or an initiative if you don't have continuity of funding and can't reach out to people with some assurance that in years 2 and 3, you're going to continue to run the program. We consulted with the department and Public Utility Commission, and they suggested that we revise the metrics used related to decision-making. That's what you see going on page 1023, where we outline that, go to the middle of the page, and then spending a portion of its electrical resource acquisition budget as designed, as outlined in this section, shall submit notice of the amount of the annual electric resource acquisition budget to be spent pursuant to this subsection. They share this information with the PUC, Department of Public Service, our electric distribution utilities, and the Vermont Public Power Supply, with a sworn statement attesting that the programs, measures, or services comply with the following criteria. Everything from there on in this section are the very same criteria that we used a year ago and in the original underlying bill. So in essence, we're switching the evaluation from the PUC evaluating and approving to the program providers themselves. In this case, to be specific, it would be Burlington Electric Department and Efficiency Vermont. They attest in a sworn statement that their programs meet the original design criteria. Therefore, we remove some language on 1024 where the PUC has obligations to evaluate and report because that's being done by the utilities themselves. On 1025, and that brings us to the clean heat standard in section 8. Folks, we make the overarching program, just to remind people, delivers a rule in January of 2026. And along the way, there are many milestones in order to keep the program and the implementation on track. In fact, there are 26 dockets that have been opened at the PUC in order to manage all the various pieces of the Affordable Heat Act that's being developed this year for and next for evaluation in 26 by a future legislature. So we adjust on page 1025, one of these dates. You'll see that designating the first default delivery agent was scheduled to happen on June 1, 2024. That is very soon. They are still, it was judged by all parties involved to be a date that is unworkable and too close at hand. They won't know enough about how the Affordable Heat Act will be structured and run in order to have anyone make a bid to become the default delivery agent. So it was, so the participants looked at all the other tasks and identified another milestone that was achievable, and that milestone is on page 2026. So we're striking on 1025 and substituting a different milestone to help us track progress on 1026. And that is that the commission, meaning the Public Utility Commission, shall approve the first 3-year plan and its associated budget by no later than September 1, 2025, which is another 15 months out, as there'll be a much more mature program for a default delivery agent to bid on. Much more knowledgeable. In order to have that September 1 date, there's one other date change above it. September 1 is only 90 days before January 1. So the 120-day window for fuel dealers to opt in or out to the programs offered by a default delivery agent needs to be shortened up to synchronize with that calendar. So September 1 being 90 days before January 1, that date is changed from 120 to 90. And that completes the changes related to milestones within the Affordable Heat Act. And I'd say the most important thing, if anyone to take away, is the entire program is still on track to deliver a program in January 26. And these are internal calendar dates to help drive progress. So that takes us to section 10. Here we get to some technical edits that were brought by the PUC. For instance, near the bottom of the page, you see the word "the" struck. It's just in essence a typo. On page 1027, an order issued under this chapter should have been this subsection, subsection C of this section. So it was a cross-reference that needed revision. Similarly, in the middle of the page, in section 6, a cross-reference to A sub 1 actually should have been A sub 2. That is corrected as well. Section 12, towards the bottom of page 1027, people may recall that the Public Utility Commission needs to establish a registry of fuel oil dealers, those who one day would have an obligation under the Clean Heat Act, Affordable Heat Act, should it go forward. In order to build that registry, to know who sells fuel in the state of Vermont, we rely on the Department of Tax sharing information with the PUC. A year ago, we simply said to share that information once. The PUC is requesting ongoing updates from Department of Tax so that they can true up their list each year and make sure that all parties that ought to participate are in fact on their registries. One other change was to make it effective on passage because that June 1 date was looming close at hand, and we wanted to get this, if possible, signed into law as soon as possible. The committee vote on the bill was 4-1-0, and we ask for your support.
One moment, please, if I might consult. Senator from Addison, is that your full report or are there further amendments to yours?
Can I ask for a brief recess on the amendment?
We'll take a 1-minute recess. Thank you, Senator from Madison. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy? Are you Senator from Caledonia?
Thank you, Mr. President. Memories, I think, are long enough to remember that this bill was a source of a lot of attention and concern. So I'd like to inquire of the reporter of the bill.
Reporter will be interrogated.
I would just like to clarify and have confirmation on the record that the changes here in no way circumvent the action that we took last year, that any creation of this program and moving forward would be acted on by a future legislature once this study and work is completed. Because there has been comment in the paper I've read, assertions that somehow it was no longer a study and that it was happening. So I think it's very important to have clarification that in fact, these are changing dates, but in no way changes the requirement that the legislature act affirmatively before anything, the program is actually operationalized and approved.
I thank the senator. So, Mr. President, I can confirm that there is no change to the way this program would be presented to a future legislature and the actions that the future legislature would have to take in order to enact it. These are internal adjustments on their own timeline. As I mentioned during the report, there are 26 open dockets to operationalize all the elements within the Affordable Heat Act, and lining up all the pieces that have to align in order to develop a complete rule on a timely basis. As they're working on it, they learned that the dates we speculated would be useful for internal milestones a year ago weren't quite accurate, and so they're proposing new ones. This is only an adjustment to how the operations are proceeding towards that future date when a rule will be delivered to a future legislature.
Thank you very much. Just for confirmation that in fact what is happening here, and because I know that it could be subject to some questions, concern, or interpretation. So it's with the understanding that this is internal, recognizing the complexity of the work and the magnitude of the work, that there has to be some adjustment, but in no way does it alter the need for a future legislature to take action to enact such a program. Thank you.
Thank you. The question pending again is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy? Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
The reporter will be interrogated.
I wonder if the reporter could explain the reason for the addition of subsection 9 in section 6. And how that differs from or adds to the bill as originally passed.
President, I didn't, could you please repeat the section you're looking at?
Sure, it is subsection 9, the last section of section 12 of the bill. It's on page 1028 at the top. In other words, why that particular section, Mr. President, needed to be added And does it change anything in the underlying, in terms of the intent and action of the underlying bill that we passed?
Thank you for the question. It's great to have clarity on what's happening. So the addition here is because, as I mentioned maybe too briefly, the original bill only asked the Department of Tax to share a list of those selling fuel in the state once. But because it's anticipated that it will be an ongoing program and there's actually several years, even were it to be implemented, there are 2 years out. The commission would like a mechanism to help them true up their list each year by cross-checking with tax. So this provides them with the access to that information on an ongoing basis.
Mr. President, as I recall, and again, it is a little vague, that the last bill dealt with the sale of fuel in the state. This bill appears, unless I'm incorrect in terms of what the original bill did, adds fuel into or in the state. Is that a significant addition?
No, thank you for the question. This is the same trigger language as what created an obligation to be entered into the registry originally. It's consistent with what we did before. The net change, again, is to make it an ongoing sharing of data from tax to PUC, whereas a year ago, it was a one-time event sharing the same data.
All right, thank you, Mr. President.
The question again is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
I believe the ayes have it. Division has been requested. Will all those senators voting aye stand? Please remain standing. Be seated. All those voting nay, please rise. Thank you. Please listen to the report of your vote. Those in favor, 20, those opposed, 7, and you have amended the bill as proposed by the Committee on Senate Natural Resources. The question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading of S305. We have up for second reading S46, an act relating to amending the Vermont Basic Needs Budget and Livable Wage. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S246, an act relating to amending the Vermont Basic Needs Budget and Livable Wage.
Having heard the second reading of the bill, I would look to the senator from Windsor, Senator Clarkson, for a report of the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. being distributed is S-246. Last session, we created the Basic Needs Budget Technical Advisory Committee to review the methodology used in constructing the basic needs budget. By statute, our joint fiscal office conducts a basic needs budget study every 2 years and presents it to all of us in every committee of jurisdiction at the beginning of each new biennium. It is a big job. The basic needs budget and the livable wage it calculates is an invaluable tool used on a regular basis in many of our committees and by human resource offices across the state. The basic, just to refresh and remind you, the basic needs budget calculates the actual cost of living in our state based on typical expenses for a wide number of household configurations. We rely on this document to appreciate what a basic living wage is and what Vermonters need to earn to afford life's basic necessities. Basic needs are the essentials needed to run a household, including food, housing, transportation, childcare, utilities, health and dental care, taxes, all sorts of insurance, personal expenses, and savings. However, the methodology used to create this important document hadn't been reviewed since 2008. And JFO was very keen that we do this work, so review it we did. The senator from Lamoille joined me serving on our task force, as did 6 other great people. We had a very productive group. We were joined by Ellen Taylor from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, Elizabeth Scharf from Capstone, Representative Ashley Bartley, Representative Elizabeth Burrows, Aaron Larkin, Human Resource Manager for the who's the head of the Vermont State Council of Human Resource Managers, and Sean Sheehan, the Director of Special Projects from the Agency of Human Services. We met 5 times, and with the assistance of Joint Fiscal Office, Legislative Council, and several other experts, the task force reviewed the methodology and assumptions used in the basic needs budget and livable wage report and made some recommendations that required either the Joint Fiscal Committee's approval or a statutory change from all of us, from the General Assembly. Our review resulted in recommending 8 changes to the basic needs budget, which we feel will make this a better tool to accurately identify what it costs to live in Vermont. And as we all know, that has changed remarkably in the last 4 years. 6 of these changes have already been approved by our Joint Fiscal Committee. Those were changes to the assumptions that we made about food, childcare, clothing, household expenses, telecommunications, personal expenses, and personal care products. 2 changes, however, need your help. We need your help to make them. 2 changes that are need to be made statutorily, and those 2 changes are what comprise the bill before you, S-246. The task force recommends, first, that we change the basis of the official livable wage to a single adult in shared housing, rather than assuming, as we do currently, that the single adult is part of a married or partnered couple paying taxes together and living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And second, we publish separate official livable wages for urban and rural areas instead of one average livable wage. Right now, we average rural and urban. The task force received testimony that outlines specific areas where the geographic distinction affects estimated expenses. You can think of them yourself. Housing, transportation, and childcare being the chief differentiators between urban and rural settings affects these costs. And they vary quite a bit between our urban and rural settings, which is interesting because, of course, the rest of the country views Vermont as entirely rural, but of course, we don't have the same opinion, and it's not reflected in our expenses. These components comprise a significant portion of the overall budgets. And finally, The bill states our intention that this methodology for calculating the basic needs budget and livable wage be updated every 6 years or more frequently to ensure that it continues to reflect the actual cost to maintain a basic standard of living in Vermont, so that we don't fall quite as far behind as we had. The task force believes that adopting these changes will improve the quality of this work and result in a more accurate understanding of what it costs Vermonters to maintain a basic standard of living and what they need to earn to afford to live in Vermont. We heard from a home care worker with the Developmental Services Respite Vermont Home Care United, our auditor, our Sustainable Jobs Fund Executive Director, our Divine Legislative Counsel, and our wonderful Joint Fiscal Office analyst who really led the charge. And we are very grateful. And with a unanimous committee vote of 5-0-0, and our committee vote, our task force vote was equally unanimous in recommending these changes to you. Our Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs had a unanimous vote of 5-0-0, and we ask for your support on S-246. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Windsor. The question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S-246. We will pass over H-554, the reporter being currently hospitalized. Very quick update. I had a conversation with Senator Norris last night. He seemed in very good spirits. He said he felt much better than he had for years, and he will be with us, I believe, next week. So all good news all the way around. With that said, that brings us to H-801, an act relating to approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Waterbury. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H-801, an act relating to approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Waterbury.
Having heard the second reading of the bill, I would look to the senator from Washington for a report from the Committee of Government Operations. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. President. H-801 is primarily the first charter of the town of Waterbury. It does a couple of things in that regard. It establishes local options taxes for sales and meals, rooms, and alcohol. The second part of Section 2 makes it so that the municipal manager has the authority to hire, appoint, discipline, and remove town employees. And the municipal manager may authorize a department head to do the same for their employees. When the municipal manager appoints a department head, that appointment must be approved by the select board. I say H-801 primarily is the first charter of the town of Waterbury because Section 3 reorders the town charters in the appendix of Title 24 in order to delightfully keep them in alphabetical order. It turns out that Vermont has a surprising number of cities and towns that begin with the letter W, which happens to be one of my favorite letters. So this reordering here will allow for more W towns to add charters should we need to add to the list. The local options tax portion of the charter was approved by the voters 162 to 75 and approved the manager's appointing authority section by a vote of 195 to 40. I do want to note that that is a particularly low turnout for a town of over 4,000 voters, which is only 5% of the vote. This low turnout is likely due to the fact that this vote was held as a special election on December 5th of last year. The manager from the town of Waterbury said that they would have held it sooner, but for the flood in July. The Senate Government Operations Committee heard from the Legislative Council and from the Waterbury Municipal Manager. We found H-801 favorable with a 6-0-0 vote and asked for the support of the Senate.
The H-801 also went to the Committee on Finance, and for that report, I would look to the senator from Washington, Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance also looked at this. Our prime area of authority is over local options taxes. Since the Committee on Finance has more than once voted to allow any town to do local option taxes, we approved of the local option tax that's requested by the town of Waterbury. And if any of you are familiar with the town of Waterbury, it has several nice watering holes that would probably prove very advantageous to the town tax.
Thank you, Senator from Washington. The question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 801. At this time, I believe we are moving to S 213. However, we have a slight glitch in that we are still printing copies of 213. So I would declare a brief recess and ask that senators remain at their desks or very near their desks, because we will just have time, I believe, to complete S 213 by our 3 o'clock hard stop. So I will adjourn us for just a moment or two.
Oh, well, listen, but I also think that.
The Senate will please come to order. We now have up for consideration S 213. S 213 is read for the first time and is referred to Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, which considers that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations that also recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S 213, an act relating to the regulation of wetlands, river corridor development, and dam safety.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, the Senator from Addison.
President, again, this is Bill S 213. And it appears in an act relating to the regulation of wetlands, river corridor development, and dam safety. It appears in today's calendar, beginning on page 1084. And if I may ask of the Senate Secretary to have the handout with the table distributed, please. Thank you. So today's the first day of spring, and it seems like a suitable day to be talking about something optimistic and forward-looking. But it starts with a hard reality, and that is talking about the flooding we've experienced in the last year. The total cost of the July floods for the state of Vermont are approximately $1 billion with a B dollars, and we had people die in that flood. We've had thousands of Vermonters who have lost their homes. We have had hundreds of businesses that had to close. Many of those are out of business, and I just want to reiterate that it is a lasting trauma. It is not over yet. The repairs will take on the order of a decade. Irene, back in 2011, The last FEMA funds for Irene recovery were just dispersed. So, and I've also talked to people recently who lived in areas where there was flooding, who decided during spring runoff to evacuate their homes ahead of time because they're too nervous to stay in their own homes because we could see spring floods as well. So in short, this is not something that happened in July. This is an ongoing emergency. Happily in this state, we're all familiar with Vermont Strong. We have communities with a strong sense of spirit. People show up, they help each other, they clean up and help people recover. But I think now there's only so much of that kind of energy that you can rely on. The July flood is the biggest flood, but we also had flooding in December. And on the evening of the 18th, I watched the national flood gauge information and watched the water in Johnson, Vermont, which was hit hard in July, rise to the same level again. If you ask the Center for Memorial, he can recount the number of homes that are lost, approximately 30, a wastewater treatment plant destroyed, town offices, and more. So again, it's an ongoing emergency. So along with Vermont Strong, this bill hopes to help us be Vermont smart, because we know that it's only a matter of time before we see more flooding. And 213 is a response to the state level vulnerability to catastrophic flooding. For those who wonder if the state ought to take on this work, I would say that this work is precisely the work government ought to take on. And in fact, only the state is capable of action commensurate with the challenge. For instance, physically, the Champlain Basin incorporates 136 towns. That watershed extends into every county other than Essex and Wyndham. A vast physical network like that crosses many municipal lines. So it's complex. And just as we have river systems that cross all these municipal lines, we need a program that can also cross those lines. One that takes an integrated approach to managing our vulnerabilities, using all the natural resources that are part and parcel of flooding. So the bill addresses 4 resources to help us protect Vermonters from future floods, to enhance our resilience, and to reduce damage, the cost, and the trauma of coming floods. We built this program in 213 with 4 tools. We address river corridors, floodplains, wetlands, and dams. I just want to also note that, we have inherited our historic settlement patterns with many of our villages nestled up against our rivers back when rivers were essential for transporting goods. And beyond our village centers, our classic winding roads often curve and follow rivers as well. Our homes are built here, and alongside historic settlement patterns, there is this increased risk of flood in terms of severity and frequency. We have known about this flooding problem for a long time. State plan after state plan, from the Forest Action Plan to the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, the Climate Action Plan, and the Lake Champlain TMDL Plan have all told us we need to stop developing in some of these more dangerous areas, more vulnerable areas. Incentive programs have thus far been ineffective at getting towns who are already overburdened and have a lack of capacity and resources and technical expertise to address something as complex as flooding and river corridor management, that we should be providing additional assistance to those folks. We also heard from our regional planning commissions and Vermont League of Cities and Towns that this is burdened beyond the capacity of the RPCs and the states. The municipalities. Finally, there was polling back in the beginning of the winter. 7 in 10 Vermonters back in January worry that they are impacted by flooding. Majority said they're more worried about flooding than they were 5 years ago, and more worried about flooding than they are about taxes. So when asked if they would support limiting development in high-risk flood areas, 2/3 said they would. with a majority of folks in both parties. So our state plans and our personal experience tells us we need to do this. Our municipalities are asking for assistance, RPCs. And so in this bill, we deliver on that request in 213. You've all received a handout, a table, a chart, excuse me, on these 4 different areas. Again, river corridors, flood hazard areas, wetlands, dam safety, and then some additional dates. There are 25 dates in here, rolling all the way up to 2028. So it's a multi-part program that is, again, comprehensive because it's a comprehensive challenge. Turning to the bill itself, again, there's a short title, the Flood Safety Act. In section 2, there are findings. I'll just briefly touch on a couple of them. The northeastern region of the United States has experienced a 60% increase in more extreme precipitation events since 1958, especially with the inland flooding of valleys where persons, infrastructure, and agriculture tend to be concentrated. Second, in terms of where we tend to see damage, according to the Department of Environmental Conservation, around 1085, 70 to 80% of all flood-related damage occurs in Vermont's river corridors. And in these river corridors, only 10% of Vermont's municipalities, cities, or incorporated villages have adopted full river corridor protections through the department's model bylaws. So this bill proposes moving forward on river corridors, floodplains, again, wetlands, and dams, of which we have approximately 1,100 in the state of Vermont. Section 3, again, on 1085. I'm going to spend some time on this one. It is a model for how we address some of the challenges throughout. In the first section here, on a report, January 1, 2026, the Department of Environmental Conservation shall amend by procedure a statewide river corridor-based map to identify areas suitable for development that are located within existing settlements and that will not cause or contribute to increases in fluvial erosion hazards. So fluvial erosion hazard is when a river is angry and boiling and rips things apart, culverts, bridges, buildings alongside them, etc. So the first phase is mapping. This is like a general recipe. We start with mapping across the board for river corridors, floodplains, wetlands, and the second phase that follows on is listed in B here, beginning in January 25 through January 27. DEC shall conduct an education and outreach program to consult with and collect input from municipalities, environmental justice focused populations, Environmental Justice Advisory Council, businesses, property owners, farmers, and other members of the public regarding how state permitting of development in map river corridors will be implemented, including potential restrictions on the use of land in river corridors. The department shall develop educational materials for the public as part of its charge in this section. The department shall collect input from the public regarding the permitting of development in map river corridors by this act on or before January 15 of 27 and until permitting of development in map river corridors begins under 10 VSA 754. The department shall submit to the Senate Natural Resources Committee and House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Environmental Justice Advisory Council a report. So first was mapping, second is outreach and community engagement with all interested parties and the list, and then we get a report. So the legislature monitors how progress is being made. In 1 through 4 on 1086, here's what the report delivers back to us so that we can stay abreast of how the work is proceeding. A summary of the public input it received during the state permitting and development of map river corridors during the public education and outreach. Recommendations based on the public input collected for changes in the requirements for state permitting and development and map river corridors. An analysis and summary of state permitting of development and map river corridors on environmental justice populations, and 4, a summary of the department's progress in adopting the rules required under 10 BSA 754. So again, it's map first, engage the community second, monitor at the legislative session, and based on those years of work, write rules in order to implement. I'm going to go on to section 4. In section 4, we amend the existing definitions of river corridor regulation. Currently, the state regulates and permits development in river corridors when the development is exempt from municipal regulation. And the state regulates these activities to maintain compliance with the FEMA NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, which requires regulation of all development in flood hazard areas. In the same section, you'll see references to 44 CFR 59.1, that's FEMA language in federal code, and we harmonize definitions of existing settlements and map river corridors. In section 5, we go on to permitting. 754A requires DEC to adopt rules for the regulation of development in river corridors on before July 1, 2027. So again, here we are in 2023. There is a long, strong buildup to any rules through, again, mapping community engagement. The rules will continue to regulate the development exempt from municipal regulation, and in order to help us maintain NFIP compliance. Again, if you don't have, if you're not compliant with the FEMA regulations, your town is ineligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. Under 754B, the rules shall establish requirements for permitting, provide exemptions from permitting, provide the process for municipal delegation of the permitting program, as some municipalities may wish to take this work on themselves. And finally, set a process for amending the statewide river corridor base map, which will need ongoing maintenance because rivers move. We saw FEMA maps with floodplains. The rivers had moved so far, they were no longer even on the FEMA map. They were outside the floodplain. Under 754E, beginning in January 1 of 2028, a DEC permit is required to conduct a development in a river corridor. In section 6, we get into state flood hazard area standards, which are in 10 VSA 755. Under 755A, ANR shall adopt rules to establish a set of flood hazard area standards for enrollment in NFIP. So we were in river corridors, which is the space between that a river will tend to meander. If you're a state fluvial geomorphologist, you can reasonably predict where the outside limits of where a river will tend to stay. That's the river corridor. Outside that, no surprise, are the floodplains. So now we're moving on to flood hazard areas, as in floodplains. The rules shall, and as the state adopts rules to establish flood hazard area standards, the rules will meet or exceed FEMA's required NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program rules. A municipality with a flood hazard area bylaw shall update their bylaws to conform to the state standard, and on or before January 1 of 2028, the state flood hazard area standards shall be the state's minimum flood hazard standards. So an example of a change between a minimum and a model or standard would include elevation above the base flood level for a 100-year flood. Right now, to be compliant with the federal rules, you only need to be at the same level as the highest point of a 100-year flood for your first inhabited floor. But more protective standards add quote unquote freeboard. They may be base flood elevation plus a foot or 2 or even 3. So you start getting living spaces up out of water. There's also other things you can do to harden those structures so they're more flood resilient and can recover more quickly and inexpensively. In sections 7 through 9, we offer conforming amendments to municipal zoning and development authorities. So currently municipalities have discretion under municipal zoning authority to regulate development in river corridors and flood hazard areas. also to adopt flood resilience plans and to adopt river shoreline bylaws. Because DEC will be permitting development in river corridors, municipal authority to regulate river corridors must be removed. Municipal authority to regulate in flood hazard area remains, but municipalities will be required to meet or exceed the state flood hazard area standards adopted by ANR. Again, where these standards from the federal government established 50 years ago or more, in an era literally of different weather and different hazards. So moving to higher performance standards, we create more resilient communities so that if you are building in these zones, what is built is less susceptible to damage and loss. Now in section 10, a study committee on state administration of the National Flood Insurance Program is created in order to recommend how to reduce vulnerability to inundation flooding. Inundation flooding being the flood not in a river corridor that's tearing things apart, but high waters that rise and spread through downtown Montpelier, for instance. That recommendations include how to reduce vulnerability to inundation flooding, again, including how and to what scale to shift administration enforcement of the NFIP from towns to DEC. There's a report back to the legislature in August of 2025. And then in section 11, there's transition and implementation provisions, as well as an appropriation. Section 11 provides provisions related to the transition, implementation of staffing of river corridor permitting and state flood hazard area standards. DEC is required to initiate rulemaking on permitting development on river corridors by July 1 of 25, following all work mapping, and while they're engaging in conversations community by community with the maps they're developing. Prior to the effective date for rules for river corridor permitting, ANR shall continue to regulate development in flood hazard areas in relevant river corridors that is exempt from municipal regulation. Section 11 also includes a vested rights provision for a person who obtains all necessary permits for development in a river corridor prior to January 1 of 28. And section 11 includes an appropriation, which I won't review, as the Appropriations Committee has reviewed the bill and will be reporting, but as you can imagine, money is removed from the bill in the standard process. That completes my sections of the bill, and I would like to refer to the senator from Washington. Oh, I'm sorry, pardon me, to the senator from Windsor.
Senator from Addison yields to the senator from Windsor.
Thank you. As the senator from Addison articulated, the July flooding that happened in Vermont that we experienced made it clear that we need to take action to build resiliency, particularly for our communities and environments as climate changes and we see continual extreme events. And I have the privilege of presenting to you sections 12 through 17, and then I'm gonna go underwater. Then you're gonna hear from the senator from Washington County on dam safety, and then I'm gonna bob back up and tell you more information. But for these sections, I'm going to be describing wetlands. You can already see our cabaret skit will be puns on flooding. So as precipitation patterns have changed in Vermont, a number of unusual and damaging weather events have increased, and our watersheds need wetlands to be our filter and our sponge. That's that nature sponge conversation. Our wetlands slow down and filter any water that enters them, and they also offer an important singular habitat for Vermont's our very diverse ecology and our wildlife. Without wetlands, the water would have no other way to slow down or soak in, and that can cause more damage to homes, damage to roads, all of those downstream effects that we see with flooding. Our natural infrastructure, which is those wetlands, they serve as our best protection for safety and resiliency of our communities, and they're the least expensive approach to mitigating flood impacts, because wetlands will increasingly be that buffer for human communities from those environmental threats, such as that more intense and frequent flooding that we saw this summer. What these sections do is imagine a regulatory system within our wetlands to protect them so that they can continue to provide the critical environmental and public safety benefits that we see. I'm going to describe a little bit of those environmental and public safety benefits, and then I'm going to do a section by section. So wetlands, if you are so inclined to know the full definition of wetlands, you can find it in our wetland rules. It's not within the bill, but that definition between waterfowl and wetland, another wetlands definition, is a wetland means those areas of the state that are inundated by surface or groundwater with a frequency sufficient to support significant vegetation or aquatic life, and they depend on saturated or seasonally saturated soil conditions for growth and reproduction. This could include, but is not limited to, marshes, swamps, sloughs, potholes, fens, river and lake overflows, mud flats, bogs, and ponds, but excluding such areas that grow food or crops, agriculture, in connection with farming activities. Just to be clear, so we all know kind of the definition that we're working under. You won't find it in the bill, it's already there. And if you have questions about wetland rules, this bill is building on them rather than creating them, if you're not familiar. So wetlands comprise about 4% of Vermont's land area, but they offer that critical habitat for around 35% of Vermont's threatened and endangered plant species and 21% of our imperiled animals. So for example, restoring wetlands in the Vermont portion of the Lake Champlain Basin would achieve a 15% pollution reduction towards those goals for the lake under the EPA. So lots of benefits, small area, big benefits if we preserve. That's kind of the point I'm trying to articulate to you. The second reason, not just environmental, but public safety for why you should care about wetlands and why you should support this section is because wetlands, so let's say you don't care about the environment. Wetlands buffer us from, they buffer human communities from those big natural disasters, those environmental threats. So that's that intense, frequent flooding that we're seeing from climate change. For example, as the senator from Addison pointed out, the 2023 Vermont State Hazard Mitigation Plan highlighted the importance of wetlands for reducing flood risks for communities. Now, the greatest threat to our wetlands, that would be development. So that's draining, clearing, invasive species, for example, timber harvesting without those best management practices, and climate change. Those are our big problems that we have when it comes to our wetlands not meeting their hydrologic functions and cycles or our ecosystem functions. So alterations to disturb wetlands and their natural ability to store water, carbon, that can have adverse impacts on our flood resiliency while reducing our habitats, and it also limits our ability to have those wetlands retain nutrients and sediment, and that can also impact public health, welfare, all sorts of things. So now that you are as excited about wetlands as I am, I'm going to do a section by section of the bill. First, we're going to talk about section 12, which puts into statute that wetlands are a natural resource. It does this by providing a policy for the state to protect, regulate, and restore wetlands so that we can achieve a net gain of wetlands acreage. It also provides that Vermont regulate it as a water resource, and that includes wetlands, and to include wetlands, and it should be guided by science. And authorized activities within our wetlands should have a net environmental benefit to the state. So that's section 12. Section 13 amends the statutory definitions for wetlands, our wetlands program, to add a cross-reference to a definition of dam removal under the dam safety section. Essentially, this bill provides that dam removals are an allowed use within a wetland. Think of dam removal. Lots of small private dams in our state that removal can actually benefit our wetlands. It might feel counterintuitive, but it actually can be a big benefit to have that removal rather than keeping them in place for our wetlands. So we do a cross section, or sorry, a cross reference there. Now, section 14, this is, I would say, as the fellow senator from Windsor might say, this is the red meat of the wetlands section. It makes the mapping of wetlands that is currently happening, it puts those into statute. It also, so that mapping is done by the Department of Environmental Conservation, that's DEC. So they have an adopted National Wetlands Inventory Program, NWI, and for mapping, which uses the best available technology and relies on trained image analysis to identify and classify wetlands and deep water habitats with aerial imagery. So if you've seen those layered maps, there's some fantastic resources online where you can see where wetlands are, where we map them. So we are, as the senator from Addison noted in the river corridor section, similarly mapping first, trying to get a handle of where are those wetlands and to identify the landscape, the landforms, the water flow paths, and the water body type. And then those enhancements help with the functionality of that NWI data so we can better characterize where wetlands are and also predict wetland functions within their landscape at or beyond the watershed level. So that allows us to assess the impact of wetland changes and functions. You may hear from constituents that they're not sure if they have a wetland or not on their property or in their community. This is to help that function so that people know where wetlands are, where we can get a handle on them. So the importance of that improved wetland mapping within the NWI, we also see that with the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory. So that would provide Vermont citizens with more clarity to prevent violations and to better protect that critical climate resilient infrastructure. So we can't do anything to protect our wetlands if we don't know where they are first. That's the bottom line with this section. And we do that through, as I flip my page, we do that through section 14 by having by requiring that A&R, and you can see it in your handout with all the dates, that requiring that A&R honor before January 1st, 2026, and no less than annually thereafter update that VSWI. That's the mapping I spoke about, as well as by January 1st, 2030, we also see that completed high quality wetlands inventory plus mapping for all tactical basins in the state. So timing wise, we want to move quickly on this mapping while also meeting the needs of our communities. So section 15 also is further on the net gain of wetlands. So it puts into statute currently what is happening. We need to compensate for the historic loss of wetlands. We've lost about 35% of our wetlands that existed pre-colonial times. That's a lot of area. So before that, we had many more wetlands that in fact protected us and insulated from climate events. So we're trying to recover from that historic loss. And while current statute has no net loss, meaning if you take from wetlands, you must have the same amount in an area be there again, we're now having a net gain. We do that by enforcing where that wetland has to have a net gain as well. So you have to see the net gain within what we call a HUC. If you want to get in deep on what that means, it's essentially where are the watersheds in our state and the size of the watershed. You can have, we have with this section of the bill, HUC 8 level, for example, where you have to have the net gain shown within a HUC 8. So that's an area, a region. And they spend a lot of time identifying within within this section what activity is permitted. So within that section, and if you're reading along in the bill, in section 918B, it provides that where a permitting activity in a wetland causes more than 5,000 square feet of adverse effects that cannot be avoided, A&R shall mandate that the permit applicant restore, enhance, or create wetlands or buffers that compensate for the adverse effects of the wetlands. So it does a few things here. The amount of wetlands to be restored, enhanced, or created shall be calculated by determining the acreage or square footage of wetlands permanently drained or filled as a result of the permitted activity, and multiplying that acreage or square footage by 2, that's that net gain for a 2-to-1 restoration of wetland loss. It also amends the wetland rules to incorporate the net gain rule into permits issued after September 1st, 2025. It establishes a set of parameters and restoration ratios for wetland restoration projects. It requires that the wetland rules establish a Vermont in lieu fee compensation program that would allow for adverse impacts to wetlands to be compensated through compensation payments. So if you can't find an alternative with that wetland trying to have a net gain, we also have an in lieu of fee, something many Vermonters are familiar with. On or after April 30th, 2025, and annually thereafter, we also require a report to the legislature on the annual loss and gains of significant wetlands in the state. And then on or after April 30th of 2027, and every 5 years thereafter, we ask them to report to the legislature on the status of wetlands in the state. Okay, section 16. It clarifies that the A&R Enforcement Authority over discharges of waste to surface waters also applies to discharge of waste into wetlands. I won't go into great detail, but you might understand why you don't want waste going into a wetland. This already is state policy, but is not currently recognized under section 1274, and section 16 would allow the enforcement of 1274 in order to have restoration of damaged wetlands. I'm not going to spend time on section 17 because you'll see in a future amendment, as the senator from Addison pointed out, appropriations have been struck out of this bill by the Appropriations Committee. This section does appropriate $300,000 from the general fund to A&R for 2 new positions. However, that you will see in a later amendment being removed. I will now yield to the senator from Washington, who will cover section 18 through 24.
The W senator from Windsor will yield to the W senator from Washington.
President. Sections 18 through 24 pertain to dam safety. During the July flooding and in the days that followed, a lot of eyes in Washington County anyway were watching the Wrightsville Dam, one of Vermont's 3 state-owned flood control dams, which ultimately came within about 1 inch of overtopping. While that dam functioned just as it was supposed to, other dams in the state did not. The Hands Mill Dam, for example, in the town of Washington, collapsed in the July flooding, and its failure destroyed a shed, a camper, and washed a significant amount of sediment downstream, with much of which likely ended up in downtown Barrie. That wasn't the only dam that failed in the July floods. In fact, there were 5 dams that failed and 50 dams were overtopped. Frankly, we were lucky it wasn't worse. Vermont has 44 high hazard dams, meaning that if they were to fail, loss of life would likely occur downstream. We have 133 significant hazard dams, which is 1 step lower than high hazard. Significant hazard means that major property damage and lifeline disruption would likely occur if they were to fail. The remainder of Vermont's dams are considered low or minimal hazard. A dam's hazard rating, or how much damage would occur if it were to fail, is a different metric than a dam's condition. The condition rating tells us how well kept the dam is. For those ratings, they're good, fair, poor, and unsatisfactory. I would personally lose more sleep over a significant hazard dam in unsatisfactory condition than a high hazard dam in good condition. In order to make sense of section 18, it's important to know that there are currently 3 main entities overseeing dam safety in Vermont. In 1920, the Federal Power Act established the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which regulates all hydroelectric dams built after 1920. Vermont had 21 hydroelectric dams prior to 1920, so these 21 pre-1920 dams are regulated by the Public Utility Commission. Dams built after 1920 that are not hydroelectric are regulated by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So those are the three main regulators, FERC, the PUC, and DEC. There are 992 dams regulated by DEC, and DEC has engineers on staff with expertise in dam safety. This is what they do. By contrast, the Public Utility Commission does not have dam safety engineers on staff, and every time they inspect a dam, they have to hire outside expertise. The PUC attempts to approximate DEC standards and requirements for dam safety, but ultimately, PUC's standards and expertise are just not the same as DEC's. So Section 18 transfers jurisdiction over the safety of the 21 PUC dams to the DEC, except for any hydroelectric specific equipment and functions. It's worth mentioning that 4 of these 21 dams are high hazard dams, meaning that if they were to fail, there would likely be loss of life. The Public Utility Commission was glad to have all 21 of these dams off of their plates, and DEC was amenable to adding them to theirs. But that may not be the end of the story, though. I'm going to jump ahead to Section 23, because Section 23 says that DEC is going to petition FERC to review the R21 pre-1920 hydroelectric dams to see if they, FERC, ought to have jurisdiction over them. So coming back to Section 18 and looking at the language of the bill, the majority of Section 18 is conforming language that reflects that DEC will have authority over dams, not the Public Utility Commission. It accounts for the fact that DEC has engineers on staff that will do inspections. It also makes dam inspection reports and any notifications of unsafe dams available to the public. It will make these 21 hydroelectric dams subject to DEC's more rigorous safety standards. Section 18 also contains a revolving loan fund. Currently, it's called the Unsafe Dam Revolving Loan Fund because it's money just for dams that have already been deemed unsafe. The committee agreed that this money should, in addition, also be made available to all dams to prevent them from becoming unsafe. So the name has been changed to the Dam Safety Revolving Loan Fund, and there will be more emergency, there will be both emergency and non-emergency projects eligible for funding with a different set of criteria outlined for each. And it directs ANR to adopt rules for financing from the fund. And there's a report annually to the legislature about the administration of the dam safety program, including financial assistance provided by the Dam Safety Revolving Loan Fund. Again, jumping ahead to Section 24, but this is just to finish all the sections that pertain to this transition with DEC assuming jurisdiction over PUC dams on or before July 1st, 2028. There are annual reports on the transfer between now and then, and this section requires that DEC rulemaking for this transition be completed by July 1st, 2027, so the rulemaking will be done before they take over. After the July flooding, DEC's dam safety program was extremely busy doing post-flood dam inspections, and as a result, they need more time to complete their dam dam registration report and the new dam design standard rules. So sections 19 and 20 postpone due dates by a year for the dam registration report and the dam design standard rules. Section 21 is about the appropriations, and I'm going to skip this section since it was also pulled. But it does involve 6 additional positions as well as money appropriated for the $2 million, money appropriated for the Dam Safety Revolving Loan Fund. Section 22 creates a study committee on dam emergency operations planning. Many dams have an emergency action plan, which identifies the area that would likely be inundated by a dam failure. And it identifies actions the owner must take to protect life, property, lifelines, and the environment in the event of a dam failure. Currently, all FERC-regulated dams are required to have such a plan, and through rulemaking, DEC will be able to require high hazard dams to have an emergency action plan. Currently, once a plan is created, they're sent to the town that hosts the dam, but that's often all that happens. Unfortunately, for many of these high hazard dams, if they were to fail, it would affect multiple municipalities downstream. So this study looks at how to create regional emergency action plans to coordinate regional responses to possible dam emergencies, including evacuation routes. And it looks at who should be responsible for putting together these regional emergency action plans and how they might be funded. The report from this committee is due to the legislature at the end of 2024. And since we're going through it chronologically, I've already laid out what is in sections 23 and 24, since they pertain to the transfer of jurisdiction of dam safety from the PUC to DEC for subset of dams. So that is it for me, and I'm going to yield back to the senator from Windsor.
The senator from Washington yields to the senator from Windsor regarding the topic of water.
Fun fact, since you have to listen to me again, 1 acre of wetland with water 1 foot deep can hold between 330,000 to 1.5 gallons of water. Okay, so now on to section 25. No longer talking about wetlands. We're talking about basin planning in section 25. This section, currently ANR does basin planning for the 15 river basins in the state. And now we are asking them to, in addition to work that they're currently doing, also identify in each basin ways to mitigate the impacts of severe precipitation events on those communities through implementation of nature-based restoration projects or practices that increase natural floodwater attenuation and storage. So adding on to some work they already do, a really solid addition. My next section is section 26, and this talks about expanded polystyrene foam, a transition from some of the other topics we've been discussing today. So polystyrene foam, dock foam. Not only has climate change caused devastating flooding to our homes, our businesses, our communities with extreme winds, larger waves, and dramatic fluctuations of water levels, we've also seen it damage our shoreline structures, and that includes our docks. And the result is an increase in marine debris in our rivers, our lakes, and our ponds. So that plastic foam pollution that commonly gets into our waterways, it's basically breaking off of docks, from outdated or even abandoned docks, buoys, or moorings, that continual fragmentation into smaller and smaller pieces, that persists in our environment for decades. If you've walked any kind of shoreline in Vermont, you've probably seen little bits of blue, little bits of white, that kind of nasty foam stuff that just seems to hang around or float in our rivers. Statewide data that has been gathered with on the ground and science-based nonprofit organizations show that the scale of the problem shows a very large scale to the problem and a disturbing increase in plastic foam pollution over the last decade in our waterways. And all of that is growing worse and worse because of that climate change that we're experiencing. So what do we do in section 26? We now mandate encapsulated or plastic foam flotation, so meaning that foam has to be encased. So prohibits the use of unencapsulated and loose beam foam in the construction or repair of floating structures, and places restrictions on the sale and disposal of unencapsulated and loose bead polystyrene materials used for flotation. So that's section 26. No foams. Okay, so section 27, as the point has been made multiple times, appropriations. We have in this section a $50,000 appropriation from the general fund to DEC to support education and outreach regarding this section. That has been removed. You'll find out in the future. Section 28, that is the establishment of a study committee on the enrollment of the floodplain management land in use value appraisal. So that establishes that study committee, and it will determine whether or not or how to authorize the enrollment of land designated for floodplain management in the use value appraisal program, UVA. I stand next to a senator who has spent a lot of time talking about that project. The report is due to the legislature on January 15th, 2025. Section 29, our effective dates. We have a delay of the dam registration report, which is section 19, a delay in the dam design standards rules in section 20, and a requirement for the DEC petition to FERC in section 23. All of those take effect on passage. All other sections take effect on July 1st, 2024, except the rulemaking for the Dam Safety Revolving Loan Fund takes effect on passage. The requirement to the update of the tactical basin plan shall be effective for the basin plans issued on or after January 1st, 2025, and the rulemaking for the expanded polystyrene foam does take effect on passage. In conclusion, for my remarks, I wanted to just note that I want to note that I'm proud to be able to have presented the sections I did, and that I will be voting in favor of this bill and supported this bill on behalf of the communities of Cavendish, Chester, Ludlow, Plymouth, and Weston. And I now yield to have a stronger and smarter Vermont to the senator from Addison.
Senator from Addison.
Batting cleanup here. So it's a, as you have heard, it's a comprehensive bill that includes many actors across the landscape. So we have a comprehensive list of witnesses from many different areas. Charlie Baker from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, Jason Batchelor, Commissioner of DEC, Ted Brady, Executive Director of Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Chris Campany, Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Planning, Jared Carpenter, Water Protection Advocate, Josh Castengay, Vice President of Green Mountain Power, Megan Cousineau, DEC Environmental Assistant, Karina Daly, Environmental Science for the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on the Future of Lake Champlain, Will Dwayne, Land Acquisition Coordinator for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Rob Evans, River Programs Manager, Department of Environmental Conservation, Doug Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer of the Department of Finance and Management, Maggie Gendron, Deputy Secretary of ANR, Chris Guyard, co-owner of the Dock Doctors, Ben Green, Dam Safety Engineer, Department of Environmental Conservation, Scott Johnstone, General Manager, Morrisville Light and Water and Light, Mike Klein, River Ecologist, Pete Laflamme, Director of Waste Water Management Division of ANR, Laura LaPierre, Wetlands Program Manager, ANR, Amy Merritt of Hickok and Boardman, Representative Mark Mahaley from the House, Secretary Julie Moore of ANR, Candace Morgan from Green Mountain Power, our counsel, Michael O'Grady, Deputy Chief Counsel, Lauren Oates, Director of External Affairs for Nature Conservancy, Mason Overstreet, Staff Attorney, Conservation Law Foundation, Rebecca Pfeiffer, State Floodplain Manager and Vermont NFIP Coordinator at ANR, Carla Raimundi, Director of the ANR Environmental Justice and Civil Rights Division, Jill Remick, Director of Property Valuation and Review of Department of Tax, Bethany Sargent, Monitoring and Assessment Program Manager, Watershed Management Division, ANR, Elizabeth Schilling, Staff Attorney, Vermont Public Utility Commission, Julie Silverman, Lake Champlain Lakekeeper of the Conservation Law Foundation, Hannah Smith, Associate General Counsel, ANR, Ashley Sullivan, Executive Director of the Raiza Project, Pat Swazi, President, Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds, Tasha Wallace, Executive Director, Memorial County Planning Commission, and Dylan Zwicky of Leon Public Affairs representing Green Mountain Power. I'll finish where I started. Is this the right project for government to take on? And I would say, I would go back to my favorite on this one, Abraham Lincoln. The legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done, but cannot do at all or so well do in their separate and individual capacities. So no individual, no community, no county can successfully take on the large challenge that we're talking about. It's a task that appropriately belongs to the state. Thank you for that, and we hope the committee asks for your support on the bill.
The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations. For the report of the Committee on Appropriations, the senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Appropriations did as it does. We have removed the dollars from the bill. We've made a couple of changes in the bill itself. Before I go through the work that we did, I would like to say that the Committee on Appropriations recognizes the importance of the work that's embedded in the bill and the importance of responding to the challenges of climate change. And the bill, as we looked at it and heard about it from the sponsor of the bill, from the reporter of the bill, does allow for both a response to climate change and prevention. So moving forward with the Committee of Appropriations amendment, first in section 3, we struck out the six new positions requested by the agency of $900,000. And we struck $225,000 for contracting. So essentially struck out the entire subsection C. In section 10, we changed the representation on the study committee, striking 2 legislative members at approximately $6,500. And then we added 2 new members from municipalities of differing sizes, 5,000 or more persons and a municipality of less than 5,000. Then in section 10, we also changed the assistance in little d. We changed the assistance that would be given administrative support and assistance from legal operations in the State House and legal counsel in the State House to the Agency of Natural Resources. We all understand our joint fiscal office and our councils are extremely busy and I won't say overworked, but getting close to it. In section 10, we added that rather than the Office of Ledge Counsel will call the first meeting, the Secretary of Natural Resources or designee will do that. Also in section 10G, we allowed for compensation for per diem compensation for those folks who wouldn't ordinarily be reimbursed based on their positions. Our third proposal amendment is in section 11. So the transition implementation appropriations are struck in D, and that those are the 2 positions that would be under section 6, $300,000 from general fund. We also took out the $225, that would be good. $225,000 for the state flood hazard area standards and municipal assistance. The fourth proposal amendment in section 17, we struck the appropriations for sections 12 through 15, that's $300,000. And that money would be used for water resources, wetlands management, dam removal, wetlands maps, and reporting. The fifth proposal amendment relates to striking out section 21, which would allow for $900,000 or 6 positions to do the work in the dam safety section. And then we struck the $2.0 million for the dam safety revolving loan fund. In the 6th proposal amendment, section 22, we removed the 2 legislative members, similar to what we have done earlier. And then we simply took them out. And then we added or replaced legislative operations with and our joint fiscal office and our legal counsel with assistance from the Agency of Natural Resources. And then similarly, we add that the Agency of Natural Resources will convene the first meeting. And then for compensation of the study committee, again, we took out the $8,300 for the legislative members and replaced it with boilerplate language for folks who are not otherwise compensated will be allowed a per diem. We then, in our 7th proposal amendment, section 24, we struck out 7 completely. So that's the transition dams in subsection D. So we struck out the use of the revolving loan funds that are mentioned earlier. Then in section, our 8th proposal amendment, section 27, is the $50,000 for DEC education for polystyrene open cell use in the waters of the state. We struck that money. In section 28, again, we struck 2 legislative members from the study committee on enrollment of floodplain management, land use and use value appraisal reporting process. That's another $5,600. The total amount that then is struck from the bill is $4.9 million, plus the 20,000 and a little over per diems. So overall, the work, the Appropriations Committee has removed all of the funding, removed all the House and Senate members from the 3 study committees, and shifted the administrative responsibility for those study committees from Ledge Council to the Agency of Natural Resources. I would like to reiterate that the committee by no means undervalues the work that is here, and the money that would have been appropriated will certainly be considered as the budget moves forward, and there's a discussion between the 2 bodies about what will remain in the budget. So thank you, Mr. President. That's the report. The vote was 6-0-1.
One moment, I will recognize the senator from Addison. I just wanted to point out a slight, what will be considered a Scrivener's error. I consulted with the senator from Addison. If you look on page 1124, the appropriations amendment sub 3 in the second section of amendment, the word less than 5,000 people ought to be fewer than 5,000 people. We will take that as a Scrivener's error. I sent Senator from Addison a note confirming my suspicion, and we're on the same page. Senator from Addison.
Mr. President, Senate Natural Resources and Energy reviewed the finance, the appropriations amendment and supports it with a 5-0-0.
So the question is, shall the amendment offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the amendment offered by the Committee on Natural Resources as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in, Senator from Franklin.
I interrogate the reporter of the bill.
The Senator from Addison. Is there a particular section that you think you'll be addressing? There were 3 reporters. If you happen to know the section, if not, we can figure that out.
Chair of Natural Resources.
Senator from Addison is interrogated as the primary reporter of the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I understand that we are now removing all of the money from the bill, at least as indicated in the bill on the one hand. I'm wondering if there was a fiscal note on the bill when it was done.
Mr. President, yes, there was.
And what did the fiscal note say in terms of how much this bill was going to cost?
The total in the fiscal note was $4.95 million.
Now, was that $4.5 million for 1 year, or was that did it address the continuing expense?
So the note was addressing year 1, but there are expenses, for instance, hiring out contracts for mapping that will be one-time expense. But there are significant ongoing expenses. For instance, the Agency of Natural Resources to implement the program across the 4 areas that we've discussed today requested 16 full-time equivalents.
And was there any estimate as to what the annual expense, ongoing recurring expense would be?
I can supply you that number. Roughly of the 4.95 million, 2 million were to charge, provide funds to the safety revolving loan fund. So 495, take away 2, you're at 295, roughly 3 million. Of the 3 million, a portion is ongoing expense. And again, there were some one-time expenses in there for hiring out map work.
Well, there was an expense, as I understand it, for the staffing of the program, and then there was a separate expense needed to capitalize the dam safety revolving fund on an annual basis?
So currently, there's very little money in the revolving loan fund. And so throughout the period of development of the bill, we actually had $1 million to provide that initial capitalization. As we finished the bill, the Agency of Natural Resources suggested capitalization was $2 million. My understanding and recollection of the governor's recommend is that he provides $1 million to capitalize that fund. And again, some appropriations matter to sort out, but I don't know what we will end up with initial capitalization. One other thought about 1 versus 2 million is that we have a program to run in order to help people do dam safety work. We don't know how many funds will be drawn and how quickly. We will have to gain that experience as we run the program.
Would it be fair, Mr. President, to say, though, this will represent a continuing, ongoing annual expense that will have to be dealt with at some point?
Well, certainly the personnel, I hope actually that the dam safety fund is utilized by people who need to do dam safety work around the state or dam removal. And experience will teach us how much we need to add to that fund and on what frequency in order to keep that program fully functional.
In terms of the timeline of the program and the bill, what information did you receive from the people who would be responsible for doing it as to the feasibility of the timeline in the bill?
So probably the best way to be able to discuss that, the timeline, is to refer to the handout that I started with that has the 4 different programs with a whole 25 different dates laid out. So there are multiple timelines depending on what part of the program we're talking about. We have, for instance, one of the dates I would say that was most in discussion is the one on the first page of our program timelines chart, January 1 of 28. There was some concern on the part of Agency of Natural Resources that was perhaps too little time. They would like more time, as long as to 2030. Given there is frankly a tension between trying to move expeditiously because we know we're vulnerable to floods. As I was recounting in my report, we've had 4 just including the July flood. We tempered the program and came up with an intermediate date of 2028. And I think as a former project manager, I'm comfortable with, maybe you would call it an aggressive timeline, because we will start the program and then we have an opportunity to monitor progress on an ongoing basis, 2028 being 5 years out. If it seems impractical, we'll have an opportunity to modify the dates and ensure that the agency is capable of doing its best work.
And so, Mr. President, then, is it correct that the agency has advised you that the timeline in the bill is unrealistic and that they will not be able to meet it?
I wouldn't characterize it as unrealistic and unable to meet it. I think for me, I think a fair characterization was it's of concern because it is what would we call it, an aggressive timeline? We're feeling that to be direct about it. We're feeling the urgency of people dying, losing their property, being displaced on an ongoing basis. We're balancing that against how a program can be developed systematically over the next 5 years.
So, Mr. President, you have confidence that they will be able to do it, and the term unrealistic was their term, not mine.
Okay. I think, again, this is not, we start the program now and then we have no opportunity to evaluate and adjust. So I figure any long and complex program, it's always inherent. I mean, we're the clients in a way. We're asking for this work to be done. I was recounting how there is reports back to the legislature to monitor progress. We work hard to stay in tune with the progress, and if we need to make adjustments along the way, I'm confident that the legislature will be aware of it and will have the opportunity to make those adjustments. One way that could address this concern, say we're a year in and it turns out 16 people is insufficient, it needs to be 18. The Agency on Natural Resources could make such a request and the legislature could be responsive.
Thank you. Mr. President, was there, as this process began, a proposal before you submitted by the administration?
No, we started this process with a bill. We did get a response to that bill from the administration that modified the program. You know, basically we put out a program. They responded to it with a different sequence of events and a different timeline. We evaluated the proposals. Honestly, I can't tell you which pieces of their proposal ended up being woven into ours. But we ended up with 213 as you see it before you.
Thank you.
Senator from Essex.
Mr. President, can I inquire of the reporter, the main reporter of the bill, please?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the primary reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, if all the monies remain struck from this bill as Senate Appropriations done, what are we tasking A&R to do if they don't have the 16 positions and no money? What will A&R's responsibilities to be from this point forward?
Responsibilities as various reporters of the bill laid out. We tasked them with responsibilities in terms of developing mapping, public outreach and education on maps related to river corridors and floodplains, rulemaking that follows on river corridors, development of model bylaws for flood hazard areas. We asked them to manage to a net gain standard in the wetlands area. And we asked the Dams Division to take on 21 dams, eventually 2028, from the Public Utility Commission. And then we also are supporting an enhanced pace of dam inspection as part of the dam safety program.
Mr. President, if there's no money, where will the money come from?
I respectfully can't answer that question. The Appropriations Committee will be evaluating this proposal along with all the other spending requests that they receive. And so our committee will not be making a decision on that funding.
Mr. President, so if $4.9 million aren't available, and the 16 positions aren't available, would it be prudent, Mr. President, to continue pushing forward with this bill if there's no means to complete the work that we're asking A&R to do?
I would say it would, thank you for that question. I'm a believer in when we ask for work, we should fund that work. So it is my hope that we will see full funding of the bill as currently presented.
And if not, Mr. President, what do we do? We just keep on pushing forward and hope it happens, or what's the move forward if it doesn't get funded?
My personal thoughts on it, I've communicated already with the Chair of Appropriations. I would want to look at what level we're able to fund at, and then ask for services from the Agency on Natural Resources commensurate with the level of funding that we are able to offer.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, the reporter of the bill.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Appropriations Chair, I'd like to respond. Obviously, the amount of money will influence the work, and that's something that we would look at as we look and develop our overall budget. we did make a commitment that we would do this. I'm well aware of the concerns that the agency has relative to their workload. They made it very clear that to take on all the work that would be required here, they could not do it without additional resources, and we respect that. If you look at the complexity of the work that we have given to that agency, it's very significant, and I assure you, we're sensitive to that and do recognize as we finish up the budget process, adjustments might have to be made. But there's a lot of work here that if we pass this bill, will go on to the other body, and then we can deal with the fiscal reality as we close out. We recognize that some of the funds are one-time and that the positions would be ongoing, would have to be created. So I just want to say that the purpose here is to allow the bill and the work and the policy framework to move forward so that the other body can consider the provisions of the bill. And then we will have to calibrate what can be done and what cannot be done and be honest about that as we develop the budget for FY25. Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to offer a little bit of additional information, at least in terms of the dam safety program. 2 of the 6 positions that are contemplated there are currently limited service positions. So there is some funding that's already there for that. They are just conversions to permanent positions. And then I just also wanted to offer that the issue of the staffing in the dam safety program has been an issue even prior to the July flooding. It was one of the issues that was contemplated in the auditor's report on dam safety in 2022. Thank you.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No. No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended. Question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Chittenden Southeast. Roll call was requested by the Senator from Addison. Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. As your chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, I rise to support S213. I want to note, it was probably said in other ways, but 15% of Vermonters currently live in floodplains that are at risk. Many of the Vermonters who make up that 15% are low income, are seniors, are living in homes that are aging, that were put in place long before we contemplated 100-year storms happening far more frequently. I spoke in Senate Natural Resources and Energy this morning about our Be Home bill, which the B and E in that bill stand for bringing everyone home. And that is because we have 2 sides of the same coin to reckon with in the work of getting people out of floodplains where they are not safe and finding a safe, warm place for them to live that isn't contemplated as outside of the floodplain. We won't be able to determine what's considered safe outside of the floodplain if the work doesn't happen to determine where those floodplains are and what kind of storms we're facing and what kind of danger that can put Vermonters in. So while we want to get people out of floodplains and into safe housing, we also, as a committee, do not want to build housing in floodplains and in areas that we have not yet determined are at risk of being waterlogged and flooded. Finally, I just wanted to point out that there is a significant cost to inaction on this front, just as there is a significant cost to inaction in terms of developing new safe housing. $4.5 million, $5 million is quite insignificant when you compare it not just to the $1 billion price tag that we've now put on the July flooding, but as we look at December flooding, January windstorms, continued damage and continued costs, not only in the monetary sense, but also in terms of the significant trauma and emotional pain and loss and suffering of so many Vermonters. Behind that, something like 80% of Vermonters from different political parties, geographies, and situations who support getting people out of floodplains and into safer situations are many, many Vermonters who individually feel trauma and deep senses of anxiety and fear every time it rains, every time they hear a rumbling behind them that might be a mudslide or an alluvial event. I want to leave the body with two stories that both of our committees heard and that both of our committees need to be thinking about as we move forward. One came from a librarian in the Mad River Valley. She lives in a 6-unit building with a lot of other civil servants and low-income seniors who live in a building that should have probably been condemned after Tropical Storm Irene. It was damaged then. It has significant mold problems. Their heat goes on and off. Their water goes on and off. And yet they cannot afford to have the town condemn that building because there is a dangerously low, almost 0% vacancy rate in the Mad River Valley. So we want them to have a safe place to live. And in the meantime, if we have dangerously low vacancy and they have nowhere to move, we are putting them in an impossible and unhealthy situation after our floods. Second, I encourage anyone to visit our senators from Wyndham. Our senator from Wyndham on Senate Economic Development took us to visit the Melrose Terrace relocation project. What was actually quite a beautiful affordable housing community for seniors, the colonial brick, they don't build them like they used to, continue to get flooded regularly, probably every decade by the Whetstone Brook. And so it was over 80 seniors who finally made the collective decision that they kept getting flooded and they could no longer live there. That community, once it relocated out of that area, couldn't reform for 7+ more years because of local and state regulatory barriers. Those were seniors who maybe some stayed with families, some lived in other precarious housing situations, some didn't live long enough to see their community come back together because it took that long to find 70 low-income seniors a new place to live. That should not happen. What Brattleboro gained in that context was a new wetland, a new retention pond that now protects the downtown from significant flooding in an up to 50-year storm event. That's extremely meaningful. That saves a lot of life and property and it has value. But in an environmental justice context, it shouldn't come at the expense of 80 seniors who no longer get to live together and no longer have a stable place to live. So as we balance these issues moving forward, I just want to reiterate, this is two sides of the same coin. Our committee looks forward to working with your Senate Natural Resources Committee on tackling this joint problem so that we truly meet the moment for Vermonters. If we fail to do either of these pieces, we do fail Vermonters and what they're asking us to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Lamoille.
My yesterday was, after we finished out of committee, was a meeting with Lamoille County Planning Commission. And as we discussed what was needed as we moved forward in communities that were pretty hard hit with floods, the whole discussion around Cambridge Village and the village of Johnson and what was happening in those villages. There's 25 households that have been displaced. We have no projects going on within our communities of development. So we have no place for those people to go within our communities. I welcome the remarks from the chair of the Economic Development Committee. This is a question of how do we change the permit process to move along? As I just had discussions with the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency, it takes 4 months to get a wetlands delineation before you can do a project. Then it will take you at least another 6 weeks to 2 months to be able to site septic tanks. Then we've moved our stormwater regulations from 3 acres as of this last July down to a ½ acre. We have a problem with the permit process long before you get to even talking about Act 250 that everyone talks about. The process is so difficult that in a community, two communities that just faced major flood damage, we can't get projects going to have people leave the flood area and move into. And as I sit with my planning commission yesterday, it's extremely frustrating.
Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise with similar comments to the previous two senators that just spoke on this bill. I am very much torn on this bill. I do intend to vote yes today, but this bill, especially with the wetland sections, is going to create more regulatory hurdles, uncertainty, and expense, which drives up the cost of both housing and living in Vermont. This will thwart and stifle needed investment in our communities. So I'm voting yes today on the hopes and counting on the other housing priority for this legislature, which is to make it easy and to remove some of those hurdles, those regulatory hurdles, to make the path clearer to build more shelters and houses in this state. So I hope at the end of the session, this is balanced by making it easier and clearer path to build with where we know we want to build in this state by reducing some of the regulatory obstacles in our way before us today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I intend to vote no on this bill, but make no mistake, it is not because I'm opposed in any way to doing something about the problems that we face or recognizing the difficulty that so many Vermonters are experiencing as a result of these floods. I'm voting no because of the concerns expressed by the professionals who work in state government about unrealistic timelines. And also, I share some of the concerns expressed from the senator from Chittenden Southeast that we add more and more barriers in order to get things done, and at costs that we have not clearly identified, and again, under timelines that are unrealistic. Those are my concerns with this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question, Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the committee. I want to thank the Senate for a thoughtful discussion. We have made no secret of the fact that our #1 priority is catastrophic flooding. If you think about your communities in your district, you have beautiful communities on the bends of rivers. That is Vermont. That is what we sell nationwide. It is amazingly unfortunate that the things we are known for, maple sugar, towns on the bends of rivers, those things are directly and horribly affected by climate change. And in 25 or 50 years, we will need to be known for other things. With that said, Mr. President, I want to reassure my colleagues who are worried about housing writ large. That is also a top priority, and we intend to get there. We intend to make it easier to build. So have no doubt that that work is ongoing, meetings are ongoing, and collegial work among chairs is ongoing. So with that said, I am grateful for my colleagues who are going to vote for this bill to move forward on our addressing of flooding. I want to just point out what the Committee on Senate Natural Resources has done. So when you have catastrophic flooding, people need immediate help. And the chair of finance and her committee provided a bill on tax abatement. And that was immediate help that was much needed and much appreciated. The chair of appropriations and her committee provided in BAA millions of dollars to affected communities. Much appreciated and quickly delivered. And that's as it should be. But the other thing that those communities need, and frankly, that they look to all of us for as elected representatives, is true leadership. And that is looking into the future and picking the right path. And what I believe the Senate Natural Resources Committee has done is exactly that. What they have done is data-driven, it's comprehensive, and it is visionary in its way. So it's addressing dams, wetlands, river corridors, floodplains, the 4 major areas that we needed them to look at. We might in a normal year have asked them or tasked them with one of those 4 things. They have done all 4 for us, and I am grateful for that. So with that said, Mr. President, this Senate, and I believe the House as well, will deliver on solutions to flooding. They will, just because of the nature of climate change and how huge it is, they will not be the last time we act on this. Far from it. If you are in the Senate 20 years from now, we will still be doing flooding. But this is an amazing start. And again, I thank the committee for their work.
Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch,
Yes.
Senator Gray, Senator Brock,
No.
Senator Campion,
Yes.
Senator Chittenden,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Collins,
Yes.
Senator Cummings,
Yes.
Senator Gulick,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
Yes.
Senator Harrison,
Yes.
Senator Hashim,
Yes.
Senator Ingle,
No.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Senator Lyon,
Yes.
Senator McDonald,
Yes.
Senator Mazza, Senator McCormick,
Yes.
Senator Norris, Senator Perschlick,
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale,
Yes.
Senator Sears,
Yes.
Senator Starr,
Yes.
Senator Pehoski,
Yes.
Senator Watson,
Yes.
Senator Weeks,
No.
Senator Westman,
Yes.
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Williams,
No, with comment.
Senator Renner,
Yes.
Senator Mazza, Senator Norris,
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 24, those voting nay, 4, and you have ordered third reading of S213. Now for the comments from the senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to thank the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy and the work that they've done, as well as the Committee on Appropriations. But I also want to make a statement that the long pole in the tent, and that's from a former life I lived, is planning. And one of the things that we need to do is sit down and come up with a vision within the next 5 years, where we're going to go and look at how we fund things to make sure that we get the funding priority put in the right place. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And if I might remind you to, if you could write that down for the secretary in order to put that in the journal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank again the Senate for going past what we had considered stop time for today, which was 3 p.m. Apologies to afternoon chairs. It was important that we complete that debate, but at this time, I would ask that we take a motion for adjournment and pick it up at 1 p.m. tomorrow.
Is that pending announcements or is that straight up?
I was going to throw it back to you to throw it back to me, but with that said,
You're the maker of the motion, not me.
pending announcements, I would move that the Senate stand in adjournment until March 21st, Thursday at 1 p.m.
Now the Senator from Chittenden Central has moved that Senate pending announcement adjourned until Thursday, March 21st at 1 p.m. Are there any announcements? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet 5 minutes after the fall of the gavel. We're well over an hour later than we told people, and I hope we still have some witnesses left.
Senator from Madison.
Ditto for the Committee on Government Operations, 5 minutes after the fall of the gavel, please.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have rescheduled our witnesses, so Senate Education will not meet.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask Senate Appropriations to come immediately after the fall of the gavel. We have quite a few bills yet to take up. Thank you.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions will not meet today. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Senator from Windsor.
However, there will be Farmers Night. And because the House is going fairly late, Farmers Night has been moved to the Pavilion Building, to that sort of new room that's been created in the corner over here. And tonight, we're looking at applied cartooning. It's the Friends of the Vermont State House is presenting tonight. And the center that we represent, the Center for Cartoon Studies, is going to create a unique and effective program that should be pretty interesting, and talking about the work they do with their clients around the country. And using as illustration our own Vermont Freedom and Unity, the little graphic pamphlet we have downstairs. If you haven't read it, you must. It's a graphic guide to civics and democracy in Vermont. And you could come dressed as your favorite cartoon character, which would be fun after today. Anyway, and it should be terrific. And I urge you to join us at 7:30.
There's one further announcement, so our guests can leave because we're not going to vote quite right away. It may seem lighthearted, however, those of you that are familiar, annually this time of year, there's an announcement to remind you that the statewide basketball pools are open. Your picks for the men's and women's tournaments are due by noon tomorrow for the men's tournament, by noon on Friday for the women's tournament. And you should have an email with the link for that in order to enter. So it's just a friendly reminder in all of your free time, because I know you have a lot of it, to make your picks. With that, the senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate stand adjournment until Thursday, March 21st at 1 p.m. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will stand adjourned until Thursday, March 21st at 1 p.m.